Tim, thanks for joining us. I really appreciate this. There's so much BS surrounding this story, and you're the perfect person to break it down. I just want to make sure I get your credentials right? So, graduate of the United States Naval Academy, you've been to sea, you're a lawyer in the civilian capacity, have represented both Pete Hegseth as a civilian, Donald Trump as a civilian, and you're a military judge advocate general, correct?
Correct. Yeah, I'm a reserve judge advocate general, but I'm not on duty today and speaking in my personal capacity, not on behalf of the department.
Yeah, I know that line well.
Love me to say that.
The opinions that I express are mine and mine alone, not those of the Department of Defense, Department of War, nor the United States Navy. With that being said, anyway, all right. Now that we've gotten these out, I want to just start at the beginning, okay? Yeah. Because I read this stuff, and my sort of just, it was like, wait a second, that doesn't sound right. So the Washington Post comes out with a story initially saying that Pete Hegseth gave a spoken order to go kill what is a second strike. So let's take it back for a second, okay? Even go beyond this. What are we doing in sort of the international waters off Venezuela? Why are we conducting activities there?
So really what they're doing there is they are striking legitimate targets of these boats that are bringing drugs to the United States to kill Americans. And it is something that the president's been very clear on. The Office of Legal Counsel has signed off on. We are allowed to strike these boats that are bringing poison to the United States to kill Americans. And so that's really, the framework that overarches all of these strikes. And then when you get down to the specific ones,
Well, let's pause there for a second.
Sure.
So Democrats and some folks in the media say that these are questionable. So explain to people when something like this happens, we're not at war with Venezuela, right, but they these boats pose a threat to us. So what's the process that goes on to making a determination whether or not we could strike that or not? You mentioned the Office of Legal Counsel. How does that work?
So there's two levels. You have to start with the legal justification, where, as I mentioned, the Office of Legal Counsel, the White House will go, to the DOJ to get an opinion, and lawyers across, whether it's Department of War, the White House, National Security Council, DOJ, tons of lawyers are going to go into this, and they're going to say, yes, this is an operation that you can do, and then they're going to lay out parameters of this is, what constitutes a threat. This is what constitutes something that's a legitimate target. The same as we would if we knew that Al Qaeda, was bringing explosives to the U.S. on boats. And so you start with that.
And that happened. That happened
absolutely.
Unequivocally. No question about it. The White House goes to DOJ and says, we want to do this.
Yes.
And here's why. And then these lawyers all get together and say yes or no. In this case, they said yes and laid it out. Correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And so other lawyers may disagree with that. I think that's what the Democrats are trying to hang their hat on is, well, our lawyers disagree with the DOJ lawyers, but either way, we have an Office of Legal Counsel opinion saying that we can strike. The second step is once you have the legal framework, then you have to go to the factual framework. And that is where the intelligence community gets into the game, and they start to look at every individual boat and they say, what information do we have that this boat is carrying drugs, poison, intended for the United States to kill Americans, as opposed to, just a fishing boat. And so you take the intelligence, you match that up with what the legal standard is, and those two things come together to then give the commanders the option of, do they want to strike this?
Okay. So for a layperson out there, let's just walk this through. So right now there is a boat. It has left Venezuela. It's headed to the United States. The Office of Legal Counsel says if it fits the parameters that it has drugs intended for the United States to kill Americans, you can strike it. The intelligence community comes back and concurs and says, yep, that boat has it. So then what happens?
At that point, then it goes to the commander, in this case, the combatant commander, Admiral Bradley, and he'll put together a package of this is how we want to strike the boat. He'll then go to the secretary and say, sir, this is what we have. This is the intelligence we have. It fits the legal criteria. Here are the assets we have. This is how we want to do it. Do I have permission? And the secretary presumably at that point says yes or no.
Okay, so in this case, the Secretary of Defense says, "Yep, strike that boat."
Yes.
And we've seen these strikes occur now multiple times.
Correct.
Okay, but this particular situation that everybody's getting all excited about,
Yes.
what was different about this one?
So in this one, they the information is, and I'm basing this on public reporting, and not anything I know, privately, but that they struck the boat and that the boat was not sunk, and that based on the video feed that they had, that it was still floating, that there were still a couple of survivors, and that Admiral Bradley made the choice to do a second strike to sink the boat, and that second strike, that's really what all of this surrounds. What went into the decision to make that strike? Why did they do it? And was the secretary directly involved in that choice? That's really where all the murky comes down.
Let's concentrate just on the second strike,
Sure.
and then we'll get into whether or not the secretary piece of this. So the boat gets hit first,
Yes.
and there's still fragments of it around, right? Does at that point, what is the criteria then if they say we need to further disable it, dismantle it, sink it?
So it goes to whether this still constitutes a legitimate military target. So, and really it's going to go, what is the extent of the wreckage? If we're talking about a boat that's still, severely damaged, floating, the cargo is still there, it can be recovered by another boat and then still move on to the U.S., then it would still be a legitimate target. If it's totally destroyed and all we have is, a couple of little pieces of wood floating around, then this probably not. And this is something that we have, a long history with. This is something, World War II, we did this. We did this multiple times with the Japanese. In the Battle of Midway, one of the Japanese carriers was hit hard, and it was completely disabled, completely out of the fight, full of wounded Japanese people, Japanese sailors. And the USS Nautilus, the submarine, went up and torpedoed it to sink it. And that's totally legal. The reason why is because it could have been towed back, it could have been repaired, and it could have been put back into the fight. That ship is a legitimate military target. The Japanese battleship Yamato, same thing. When that was stricken and turned on its side, we continued to put torpedo bombers on it to sink it, full of Japanese sailors. All of that's legal. Same thing here. You have a boat that's it's severely damaged. It's still floating. It's still got cargo on board. And I'm going with what the Washington Post reported that Admiral Bradley said,
right,
which is that he believed that it still was a legitimate target because it could have been accessed by the cartel, towed back, taken the cargo. It is still a target. The order is this cargo, which is intended to kill Americans, needs to go to the bottom of the ocean. And that's what he did.
Okay. So if Admiral Bradley hit a ship or a part of a ship,
yes,
that was still floating, that still had cargo on it, and sunk it, I don't know that we'd be having this conversation, right? But the issue is that according to the way the Washington Post has framed this, is that it wasn't that the cargo or the ship was targeted, but rather two surviving combatants.
Correct.
Okay. So break down why that matters and what the significance is of that.
Correct. The ship or the boat remains a target. The people, under the laws of war, would not. So when you have people that are, they're shipwrecked, they're totally out of the fight, they no longer pose a threat to the U.S., that is something where we cannot continue to try and kill them. You can't target the people. Think about all the, movies of World War II you've seen where, our ships get hit, our sailors are in the water, and the Japanese Zero comes down and starts strafing American sailors in the water. That's a war crime. That you can't do. But if the ship or the boat is the target and it happens to have two survivors on board, they are considered collateral damage. And so really, when we're talking about, this situation, and I know this is going to sound funny because the action is the same, it goes to the mindset.
Yes.
When Admiral Bradley made that choice, did he intend to kill the two narco terrorists, or did he intend to sink the cargo? If he intended to sink the cargo and the terrorists were collateral damage, perfectly legal. If he intended to kill the 2 wounded terrorists and the cargo is collateral damage, then it's a problem.
All right, guys, I hate to interrupt this conversation, but if you are in the mood for a snack right now or anytime during the holiday season, do what I do. Reach for your masa chips or your Vandy Crisp. This is the perfect way to snack in Maha compliant ways. Your Vandy Crisp, I'm not kidding you. This is the best potato chip I've ever had in my entire life. It is crispier, crunchier, and I'm telling you, 3 ingredients: potatoes, salt, and beef tallow. None of that ultra processed seed oil. This stuff is amazing. Check it out. Go to vandycrisp.com. Or if you want a tortilla chip like nothing else, this is what you want to do. Go to these masa chips. So vandycrisp.com or masa chips. And trust me, these are original. They're hard to get, but you get the blue, the lime, the habanero. They're amazing. And the crisps come in all sorts of flavors now. So go to masa chips or Vandy Crisp. Use code Sean for 25% off. But that's what I'm telling you about. Oh my God, you are going to be the hit of the holiday season. If you're having people over or you need to bring something as a hostess gift, go to vandycrisp.com or masachips.com. Use code Sean, SEAN, for 25% off. Now back to the conversation with Tim. Okay, I want people to understand the gentleman that you're speaking of, Admiral Bradley.
Yeah.
Because this is not some, with all due respect, lieutenant junior grade that's hanging out on the bridge of a ship firing, missiles off of the country. Admiral Bradley is a 4-star admiral.
Yes.
He is the commander of the Special Operations Command, the former commander of Joint Special Operations Command, a former member of SEAL Teams 2, 4, and 6, one of the first individuals in Afghanistan. My point in saying this is, to your point about intent, this is not the first rodeo for Admiral Bradley. This is a highly decorated, highly experienced military officer in the rules of engagement in combat. And I think that is missing from the narrative.
It is, because not only does he have that experience, don't forget, he has a staff judge advocate. He has a lawyer sitting right next to him through this whole process. But the thing is, he's a combatant commander. He is somebody that we trusted to put into that position. We trust them to make command decisions. And I think he did the right thing here. But this is kind of one of the unique aspects of the Trump administration as opposed to the Obama administration. And the way that the Washington Post describes this, it sounds more like how it was in the Obama years, where everything is micromanaged from the top. And one of the major changes when we went to the Trump administration, both the first time and the second time, is to take that command and bring it back down to the commanders, to empower the commanders to be able to make decisions based on the battlefield conditions without having to call to Washington to get guidance from the political appointees or the president, which is going to extend, the time and potentially cost American lives. We trusted him to make that decision, and he did. And I think he's absolutely the right person for that job, and he did the right thing here.
But when you read the Washington Post story and it says that Hegseth gave a verbal order for this to continue,
right,
that just doesn't pass the smell test as far as how operations were to continue. As you point out, it would be Admiral Bradley with his team deciding a follow-on operation, correct?
Correct. Exactly. So it makes sense to people that have never served, that have never been in that situation, that okay, everything is on this, video teleconference and the president is directing, okay, shoot that guy, shoot that. It's ridiculous. It's not reality.
So what's the right way to clear up this whole situation? Because you mentioned the teleconference. I mean, I'm sure a lot of this is recorded, right? I've sat in rooms before in a classified nature, obviously, where your commanders and military leaders are watching these strikes happen. So there's obviously video of this, but it's classified. And the question is, what precedent do you set if you put it out there?
Yeah, and I saw a tweet from Chuck Schumer last night where he was saying, the Washington Post claims, that this happened, and so the tapes will prove this. So Pete Hegseth has an obligation to release the tapes. Okay, every time that the newspapers put out a defamatory story, that doesn't then trigger an obligation to declassify and release things to the public. That's ridiculous. But within the classified environment, whether it's in a skiff with Congress or within the Pentagon with investigators, or just a simple review, I mean, this is very simple. These type of missions have very clear written guidance. They have very extensive written rules of engagement that have been gone over and over by so many levels of lawyers. And you look at what Admiral Bradley did, you look at what he ordered, you look at what the after action report is, and you see, does it comply with the rules of engagement? Because the idea, and this is why I got particularly exercised when I read the latest Washington Post piece, where everybody's worried that now the president and the secretary are going to throw Admiral Bradley under the bus. Okay, that's so ridiculous, because if he has all of these well-vetted rules of engagement and they believe that Pete Hegseth makes an offhand comment about, kill everybody, and Admiral Bradley sits there and says, okay, well, I'm going to take all of these rules, I'm going to throw them to the side, and lawyer that's sitting next to me, get out of my way because I want to do this. Okay, that's when Admiral Bradley's committed a crime. I mean, that's ridiculous. Okay, right. So the idea, and look, even if the secretary had made that comment in the beginning as an offhand comment where he says, hey, sir, we have a boat. There's so many people on board. What do you want me to do? Green light, go ahead, kill everybody, do what you got to do. That doesn't supersede the written rules of engagement. I don't think he actually said that, but even if you believe these anonymous sources that he made an offhand comment like that, that doesn't supersede all of these rules of engagement. And the concept that Admiral Bradley, with his experience, would just throw all of the law and the rules to the side to say, oh no, I want to fulfill this offhand comment that the secretary made, just so they could say that Pete has responsibility himself, is insane.
Well, that's and I want people to read. This is what you referenced. The Washington Post this morning headline says Hegseth, with White House help, tries to distance himself from boat strike fallout. And this is what they write. This is the key part, I think, according to what you're saying. When two survivors were detected, the military commander overseeing the operation, Admiral Frank M. Bradley, directed another strike to comply with Hegseth's order that no one be left alive. People with direct knowledge of the matter told the Post. The Trump administration has said 11 people were killed. What they're sort of implying, and this is what I want to get your take on, is let's just say hypothetically, like the Admiral comes to Secretary Hegseth and says, hey, we got another boat. It's coming at the U.S. It's got all these drugs. Intel's confirmed this. And Hegseth says, great, take them out, right? Okay. That maybe he says that, maybe, or something of that sort. Then what they're sort of implying in the Post is that the first hit takes the boat out. And Admiral Bradley says, you know what he really meant? What he really meant is I'm going to go after anyone who survived that hit. And right. And I'm with you. I go, wait a second. That does not sound like the reaction of a very highly decorated, experienced 4-star admiral.
Exactly. It makes no sense.
So how do you see this playing out then? Right now, you've got Admiral Bradley headed up to Congress later this week. The secretary, obviously, what is it that from your legal experience and background, you would advise to say, hey guys, this is how we get ahead of this story, or explain it, because clearly there's a misunderstanding on how this whole thing works,
right? How
it went down. What is the way forward?
So the difficulty there is that some of this stuff is classified, some of this stuff has become public. And so what they can do behind closed doors is very different from what they can do publicly. What they should do behind closed doors is to go in there and say, this is what we did. Here's what we did. Here's why we did it. Everything complied with the rules. There's nothing to hide here when it comes to, within the classified environment, without, doing things that are going to reveal sources, methods, and everything else that would endanger future strikes. To go in there and simply say, this is what we did. This is what the orders were. Here are the written rules. Here's what we did. Here's how it complied with the written rules. There's nothing there. once you do that. How do you deal with it publicly? Yeah, of course, that's a bigger problem because of the classification issue. And that's one of the reasons why when people anonymously leak, classified information or false reports of classified information, they are always able to get that news cycle rolling around well before there's any rational response to it, because they know that the innocent people, the government officials who actually did do the right thing, are handcuffed from being able to properly respond to it because of the classification. And just because somebody makes a false allegation doesn't mean, oh, well, let's just declassify everything so we can defend ourselves. It doesn't work that way. It's one of the dangers of these leaks.
Right. It seems to me there's two big issues at play. Yeah. One is the role of Secretary Hegseth, right? Did he give, it's sort of like, I feel like we're talking about A Few Good Men. I mean, this is, Alyssa Slotkin seems to think this is the movie that exemplifies, or, bad orders. We'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah.
But I feel like it's like, did you order the code red? And I mean, like, Hegseth can easily prove that that's not true. That one seems to be pretty easy to say, look, I'm in a room. Like, that didn't happen. And it also seems like the New York Times reporting now seems to vindicate Secretary Hegseth in the sense that they're now sort of helping their buddies out at the Post by saying, well, he wasn't really giving the verbal order, but he kind of had made it clear what he wanted.
It's a lethal strike. Of course, I mean, we're not giving orders to go capture the boat. So yes, of course, he's ordering a lethal strike. Yeah, it's one of the problems that I think nobody's really thought about in the media is, if you carry things through their natural conclusion, what does it mean? Okay, so Hegseth gives a manifestly unlawful order of shooting people in the water. Well, that means that Admiral Bradley followed a manifestly unlawful order, and he should be court-martialed. By the way, Chairman Kane was sitting in the room. So he
Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Right. So he should probably be court-martialed. The JAG, who sat next to Admiral Bradley and said, yes, sir, go ahead. He's getting court-martialed. Everybody up and down the chain of command, they're all going to jail because they all followed this manifestly unlawful order. And as much as they want to just say, okay, this is a great opportunity to try and say that Pete Hegseth did something wrong, they're not thinking about how that false narrative trickles all the way down the chain of command. And you mentioned Slotkin a minute ago, and I think that that's one of the complicating factors here, is that they just did that incredibly stupid and irresponsible video. They're trying to defend themselves. They can't identify an unlawful order. And then somebody over here says, I have an unlawful order for you. Let's use this. Okay, now we can vindicate Mark Kelly and prevent him from getting court-martialed for his own seditious conduct. Everybody jumped on this thing so excited about the possibility of, here's the unlawful order that Hegseth gave so we can hurt him and hurt the president, that they just don't think about the reality of how this works.
Okay, and I want to get to the video and Mark Kelly in just a second. But let's deal with what I think the second issue is, which is, what was the intent of Admiral Bradley, right? And I do think that when he goes up to the Hill, obviously that's what Senate Armed Services Committee Chairman Roger Wicker, that's what Mike Rogers, the chairman of the House Armed Services, they're going to ask that question. And it seems to me that Bradley's going to say what you said, which is, here was how the situation unfolded. Here's what I felt the ongoing threat was. And yes, unfortunately, there were two combatants that survived that were collateral damage. Does that end it there?
I think it does, because ultimately, once he goes up to the Hill and he presents them the facts, there's nothing more that they can do beyond that. And, when you look at, just from a practical matter, is a 4-star admiral going to get court-martialed for this? No. Okay. It's not practically something that they can do. I don't think that there's going to be anything that really comes out of this other than, once they're fully briefed, I think Roger Wicker is going to come out of that and say, man, the Washington Post really took us for a ride. That's really what this is going to come down to, because a lawful order was given. all of this stuff completely vetted, completely controlled. There's nothing here.
Well, but you say that, but like Tim Kaine says that he plans to move war powers immediately. Should there be any military action in Venezuela? Again, I think you've got the Democrats trying to change the subject, claiming that the president and the military operation in violation of the War Powers Act, right? They're trying to now move the goalpost, if you will.
Right. And that's what politicians are going to do. The politicians on both sides of the aisle are going to take these things and try and maneuver them, really, I think more so focused on what the next election cycle is than what the reality is. And so is this going to negatively affect Admiral Bradley? No. Is this going to negatively affect, Secretary Hegseth? No. This is very quickly moving out of the realm of any serious talk about war crimes or anything like that. And it's just going to become a partisan talking point that people can argue over. But ultimately, the evidence shows that Admiral Bradley did the right thing.
So let me read you a piece from another story that the Post had on this. But it says, some current and former U.S. officials and law of war experts, these are experts, of course, have said that the Pentagon's lethal campaign, which has killed more than 80 people, so now we're talking about all of the boat strikes, is unlawful and may expose those most directly involved to prosecution. So here's because they're claiming that the alleged traffickers pose, quote, no imminent threat of attack against the United States and are not in an armed conflict with the U.S., these officials and experts say. So if you're Bradley or any of these other people that have fired not just on that boat in question with the second strike, but any of them, and you've done this, should you be worried about prosecution?
Practically speaking, no. And look, I've defended war crimes cases before, so I know about this stuff. Should they be worried about it? I don't think that there's a practical expectation that there's going to be anything there. That's a partisan talking point. In theory, could the administration change? Could the next president, if it's a Democrat, order a prosecution of these things? Yes. Is it going to really get past the motion to dismiss stage? No, because a lot of this stuff, goes into whether they did it, with the apparent authority, whether they believe what they were doing, was correct. You're going to then run into a whole bunch of executive privilege issues. I mean, it's a nightmare to try to prosecute, and ultimately, the facts just don't bear it out. And I mean, look, if the next administration were dumb enough to bring that case, then sign me up to represent, all these guys. I would love that.
All right. I want to get to the video, but I just want to ask one more legal question.
Sure.
When people talk about so-and-so might have violated the law of war, or that might have been, would it be a violation of the UCMJ or civilian law that would fall into?
So it can go either way. Because, obviously, if you're talking about Admiral Bradley, he's subject to both because he's uniformed. If you're talking about Pete Hegseth, he's only subject to civilian code because he's a civilian. But under Article 134 of the UCMJ, basically everything that is a civilian offense can be then incorporated into the UCMJ. So you can, in theory, be charged either way.
But if you're Admiral Bradley right now, right? Yeah. And I just want everyone to understand this, because when these guys throw around these terms, or even Secretary Hegseth for that matter,
right?
Let's just start with Hegseth. The Department of Justice of this administration would have to choose to bring charges against him, right?
Correct.
Okay, and that's not going to happen.
No, it's not.
Okay. In the case of Admiral Bradley, the Department of War, of which Secretary Hegseth oversees, would have to choose to bring him up on charges under UCMJ, correct?
Correct. And that becomes even more complicated, because even if you did have a willing, department, to bring a 4-star up on charges, the practicality of that is you can't even seat a jury, because a 4-star admiral needs to have a jury of peers, meaning people of equal or greater rank to them who don't know them, haven't already formed an opinion of them. Back when people were talking about, we need to court-martial Mark Milley, okay, that's never going to happen. A 4-star admiral or general is never going to be practically court-martialed because you just can't seat a jury. So
okay, this is why I love having this show, because nobody would ever. But the point is, it's a silly discussion because Secretary Hegseth is not going to convene a court-martial on somebody that followed an order. Okay, all right. So that's why this is such a stupid whole.
Right.
Like, all right, I want to get to this video.
If he does, sign me up to represent Admiral Bradley. I would love that.
All right, and then you and Secretary Hegseth can have it out. That's a separate. Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.